Okay, so welcome back. Our next talk is by Jörg Fachner. Jörg is a professor of music, health, and the brain. He's a specialist for translational issues of interdisciplinary research topics between medical, humanities, and music sciences. For 20 years, he has been working as a professional in the field of music therapy research. He's trained as a social scientist, graduated as an educationalist in music therapy, and received his doctoral degree in medical sciences in 2001 by studying changes of neural correlates of consciousness with EEG measures during music perception. And today, he's going to talk to us about sharing altered states and the emanation of imagery in GMI music therapy settings. Thank you very much, Jörg.
Thank you very much, yes. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here again after last year where I was also a little bit speaking about GIM and what is happening in GIM music therapy settings. Yes, and today I wanted to focus a bit more on how in a dyadic setting of a therapist and a client imagery emerges and how that is connected to the therapy process. Maybe one word about therapy. It is stemming from the Greek word therapoia, which means that you walk with somebody. And so that you have a time in which the other person is asking you to help her because you are qualified to help, and you may have had a training. So you should have had a training, so at least you wouldn't go to the doctor without knowing he is able to do something. So, but in the word therapy, we already have this perspective of time and the ongoing time that we are walking with somebody, that we're sharing with each other. And so music therapists, when they do that and write case studies, for instance, about their work, they always focus on particular parts in that progression of doing music therapy with their clients, and then report on these progressions or development. And we're going to look into that as well. But first of all, maybe a definition. We heard a lot about it already on imagery. This is now, a definition from Brusher, who's a music therapy theoretician. Oh God, I hate the word. And he's defining the Bonney method of guided imagery in music as an individual form of exploring consciousness, which involves spontaneous imaging in an expanded state of consciousness. There's also this term altered state of consciousness. I use that because the research in the 60s, 70s on altering states was related to the idea that there is, in the Jamesian sense, that there is let's say an ordinary consciousness, that how we manage to go on the bus, but there's always in between, in the filmiest of screens, I'm just trying to quote him, there is always the lies entire possibilities of consciousness which can be different. But we will hear more about that as well. Well, and Brusher says in an expanded state of consciousness. So this guided imagery, I'm sorry that I'm not just reading the whole thing, it has developed out of a drug-supported psychotherapy setting in which strong psychedelics were given, but then in the 60s when it was forbidden, it was just working on with the music. So there is still the idea that you induce an altered state of consciousness, but here it has developed in the way that there is only that there is a relaxation induction. So in spontaneous imaging in an expanded state of consciousness with pre-designed programs of classical music, there's also jazz, but there is an empirical set of data that has come up using a particular set of classical music programs and also some jazz tunes in there, while interacting with a guide who uses non-directive, non-analytical, music-based interventions within a client-centered orientation, all within a session that has a preliminary conversation. Why are you here? What do you want? What are your aims? And actually what the problems are. So the therapy start. Then a relaxation induction, the altered state induction or expanded consciousness induction, guided music experience, and then the return and postlude discussion on what has happened. So this protocol is trained and practiced in many places of the world since it has been developed in the 70s. And as I already said, we have the pre-music discussion, the prelude and the focus, then the relaxation induction, eyes closed, the altered state of consciousness, and you focus on an image. So this is done differently every now and then. Then you have the music program, 30 to 45 minutes, and the client images freely and describes, and the therapist facilitates occasionally with some non-directive queries. And then the client is brought out of this relaxed state, eyes closed, altered state, and then there's a part where very often the patients are just drawing pictures of what they have seen, what was happening to them in there in the sessions, or mandalas, and then a discussion happens. So in the last workshop I was presenting is a single case study where the traveler, and that's what the therapy, the client is called them, so the one that really goes on the music travel, that goes on the imagery journey, was listening to the Imagery program. Only the trained GIM therapists know about this program. I know that Helena is one of them here, and she's presenting on a poster there as well. And today, as I said, we're looking at how the work with the therapist and the client is looked at. And this client, in this case, was working on grief. So the aims, we wanted to differentiate rest and altered states, because that is not, for me, it wasn't that clear how much there is a difference between a normal resting state and how much the altered states induction is making a difference. Of course, there is inductions like, well, you have a color and you see this color, and there's different ways of inducing all that. How do you feel your arm, and your arm is getting heavy. I mean, all of you that have done relaxation inductions maybe would then know the direction. So, but I can't go into all the pieces. And well, then we were interested in the particular parts which are then called as pivotal, where there is an imagery, where there is something happening, not supernatural, that is of importance for the process of the therapy. And then, of course, looking how these imagery processes are related to brain processes in this therapy setting. So in the first study, we were modeling a typical GIM session. The test subject was an experienced GIM traveler, but not coming with a real problem, not really coming as a client that wants to have therapy from an experienced therapist. And what we then did, we were transcribing the verbal responses, and that was then analyzed from another GIM therapist. And then we were looking at the corresponding EEG excerpts and analyzed that with the neurometric measures. But today, as I said, we're going to look into a bit more into the interaction between the two. And the framework for that, social neuroscience, with the idea that interpersonal action coordination, communication, understanding and sharing of emotional states, empathy, is related to coupling and synchronization process between brains, and so that there is a neural underpinning of social interactive behavior. And so that is something for us in the music therapy of interest. And in this case, where you have a client lying down recumbent or sitting recumbent and the therapist not moving much, we have a good data, a good situation for recording that data instead of having people running around, which is also possible with mobile systems that are more and more developing. We have outside, we have showcase about what kind of devices there are. So, and the idea that we get out of the lab, I mean, we heard in the talk from Rebecca today, of course, that we want to focus on things, but that it is important to see the activities in action. So our idea is really to accompany what is going on in the therapy setting, and then simultaneously measuring brain data, in this case of the client, and and the therapist. So by hoping that it gives us more authentic data, and so that we can then analyze this authentic data and see what are these important things that music therapists speak about when they say, well, these are moments of interest. These are important parts of the therapy. And how we did that? Yes, we were having a GM session with, again, it was an experienced traveler and a guide, but in this case, really coming with a real need for having therapy, accompaniment from the therapist. And then we were recording the video, so this is the setup. You will see that a bit later. Of the two EEG caps, we utilized the brain products tool there that gives us also the chance to record simultaneously the video, so that we more see what we see is then also what we get simultaneously in the EEG, so that we can really go into micro analysis, micro levels of these things. So we were asking these 4 persons involved to rate at least 3 important moments in that session, and then we were collecting these moments and we're looking at the overlaps. I come back to this part later. So about the background of the journey of this of the therapy. So the own son of and his girlfriend has been recently diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, and this woman is currently pregnant, and so the birth of the grandchild of the traveler was in danger. So an operation was already put on hold, and to keep the child healthy. So that was the grief, or that moment in which the traveler came to the therapist and wanted to cope with the helplessness and the anxiety of losing the child and the grandchild, and how to keep hope. And then the therapist decided, okay, I will use the nurturing program, which is a particular GIM program, and we were instructing then the traveler and the guide and also the raters that they independently from each other, watch the therapy movie that we were recording, and then at least, identify the 3 moments. I've said that already. At least 3, so it could be more, and that you think that would be important in the journey, and do your usual identification, analysis, reflection, description of your core 3 sequences, because these were also GIM therapists that were listening to that. And so we ended up, and we've seen the name of Clemens Maithoff as co-presenter of this talk, who's also here present, and he will also give a poster tomorrow on some of the questions. But he has then looked into the ratings that we have received, and the 3 moments that we can see here, less clear in their overlaps, but then when you look at the traveler selection, what he said or what she said was of importance, what the guide said was of importance, and so also then an external rater, and so we have a clear defined time frame on which we then can look into with the EEG, and that MATLAB script that Clemens has developed, it can then be applied to analyze the corresponding moments and corresponding parts that were identified. Just to say, the whole session was about 35 minutes. And the identified moments is a Britain moment described from one of the therapists, that in this darker minor section of the music, the image of the tree is developed and related to memories of childbirth and difficult feelings and family trauma. So, and that started with seeing a door, and then from this looking at a door, then the image of a tree came up, and the image of a tree then developed how that is related to family ties. It's always when we look into patients' work or therapists' work, there is meaning attached to all this in that particular context. But let's see how that then is processed. Grandmother sends a message. That is with the second image. And there's music for the body and the heart. It's a long sequence also without talking, but mutuality, where the therapist and the client really felt connected with each other. We heard about this idea of theory of mind, that I know that you know, that I know that I understand where you are in this moment. And this is what therapists do, and what is kind of their daily practice to some degree, to be sensitive for these moments. So, and then Massanet to Cantaloupe, that's the third moment. Music is nurturing, that's what the client then said, and a connection to the unborn baby, and wishing all the best. So the guide then said that the analysis could focus on different types of experiences: visual, memories, embodied imagery, transpersonal, and transference to the music. So that came back from the guide when looking at the video again, and made clear that there is definitely a generational impact of the experience that the traveler had. External raters commands, so the traveler is a mixture of memories, body experiences, core imagery, and even a message. That's what we're going to look into. And then trees, roots, family history, females. So love, enclosed images, message that stood out. And that is what you would do when you look at work that is done in the therapy sessions. Well, now, having a look into the second moi, I just call it the second one, the second moment of interest, this one, because that one was quite important, where this image of a tree was developed, and then that went through the therapy session. But in this part is that's the one that we are now listening, where they were all, agreeing that this was an important part. Message from grandma. I know it sounds odd, but it's exactly. The traveler said she heard the grandmother singing, and she told her not to worry. Why? Well, we come back to that as well. Music is coming to the body and the heart, and she has experienced that as from inside as a pivotal moment for her.
Most of them,
Can you hear that?
this is nice music. Like something coming from my grandmother.
Something coming from her grandma, she said.
Like she telling me not to worry so much.
So the music goes on, it's absolutely quiet. I'm sorry, we couldn't boost it.
The music is really.
Okay, she said then something that that is related to that
Coming
feeling
into
that
the
she
body.
has.
Feeling it. And coming into the heart.
Well, it's quite emotional part now, in which she said that this is really a nurturing moment for her, that the music is getting into her heart, because she was really desperate before. But with the role of the grandma in this imagery process, and that she saw her flying towards her, sounds odd, and telling her not to worry, this moment really started to change for her, and the perspective on that as well. Okay, that's what we heard. So this is a transcript. So we've just read this, and what she said, she just spoke before with the guide, that her mother, was not really happy when she had her own childbirth. So the traveler had her own childbirth, and because she was not married, and the mother didn't like the idea that she's getting a child without being married, and was asking her to remove it. But then this moment came up where she had this message, and she's telling me not to worry so much. and music getting into my body. Now it's getting into my heart. Is the second segment that we're going to look into. So now you have a little bit of the context of these two moments of interest. And yeah, we analyzed these parts with Elan so that we have a clear-cut contextualization of what was said and where it is happening, which is also important for analyzing the data later on. So what we've seen is it was a strong emotional impact of the event for the traveler. So, and how is this shared with the guide, and when is the event recognized, is one of the questions that we had. And we were looking here we're using the tools of frontal alpha symmetry because it is a measure of emotional processing, and the dominant processing on the left side shows positive emotion, vice versa. And it indicates positive or negative valence of musical emotions, work from Schmidt and Trainer, Altemüller, Ramirez, recent work, or then looking at how cerebral symmetries are processed. Also then work in from Hausmann and Hodgett and Erola was mentioned. And and we utilized this frontal symmetry also. It was quite sensitive to music therapy process in a research study that we've done in Finland, where we compared music therapy and a non-music therapy group of depressed clients. But then Clemens came up with the idea that we should look into the temporal dynamics of this frontal processing, because, I mean, so the emotional impact that the events have, of course, then, and how it is shared, there is some work that shows that it is context sensitive in work from Converlinker, looking at leaders and followers and how that distinguished. And so we were interested in how the asymmetry changed in both during the emotional processing of these moments. And so then, of course, we built up a time series of these for the selected noise and split that into 2 seconds intervals, and then looked into how the power in the alpha band in the particular homologue EEG electrodes was, and then plotted that and corrected that. You can hear more about the technology of how we've done that and from Clemens tomorrow on the poster. And so this is this first session. And what we're going to look into now is this particular part, and that was that moment here. They both were talking about the mother and how she was abandoning the child of her, of the traveler. And she said, no, please, could you have it removed? And then this message from the grandma came in. And what we can see here is the asymmetries plotting from the therapist. So what you can see here with this one is, first of all, the electrode pair that we were using. I hope you can follow that. And then, of course, this is the left side, and then the right side, as it is said that the more positive processing is happening on the left and more negative processing on the right side. And what is interesting, that immediately when this imagery came up from the client, that the therapist, who was quite concerned about the severity of what is happening to this woman, and she saw, well, there is now really an image, a spontaneous imagery coming up, which is telling her not to worry, and that immediately made then most probably this shift. And so that's what I just said, because before this segment, the negative emotion that came up was then, that was the setting for that. And now let's look at the second segment here. And that was what we heard, that the music is coming into the heart, and so that she was really filled, that she was really happy about this imagery telling her not to worry. And that's what the traveler said and contextualized her experience in this way. It feels like my heart is opening towards the music, and the music and the spiritual sound is filling my heart. And she started to cry. The first time I heard her, I thought, of course, now she's really sad. No, she wasn't. She was really filled up with joy that there is hope coming up. And yeah, that's what's happening in therapy, you know. And of course we were happy to and so both were kind of simultaneously. We haven't done the correlational analysis, but you can see already that is, you know, that this is a shared event in a way. Okay, now let's look. We can hear that again. Oh, we can't hear. It's it's not loud enough. Right. So then the third moment of interest, and here we're looking at two EG traces, not only the F7, F8, F3, F4, and are looking now into one part in which the traveler is asked to send a message to this baby that is still unborn, but is and she is wishing her all the best. And yeah, again, we were looking at to that segment, and then the therapist asked, so what do you want to say to that unborn baby? And she said, at some point, welcome. And it's interesting how the music then came in, the Brazaiola, which is part of that. And so already in the first piece, the choir that we heard were kind of, you know, the choir of the family in her imagination, in the background also, and her mother standing out, and now this lullaby that comes up here, and immediately the traveler says, now this singing is for the baby, and that is exactly the moment in which this music comes in, and now you're going to listen to that here. And I hope you can hear it.
Is there something you can send to this baby?
Is there something you can send to the baby?
Yeah,
Love, hope.
good energy,
Yeah,
hope,
yeah,
love.
yes.
And that was the moment when they both felt very much connected, and that, yeah, it's fine, connected, and so that they were sharing this moment when the music came in there.
The singing is for the baby.
And she says that, singing is for the baby. All right, that's the same on here. So, just in the transcription, so the traveler says that when this female voice enters, singing is for the baby, she feels the tree and the husband and son and daughter that is coming later on. So they are dancing around this tree, and yeah, we're all standing hand in hand around the tree, and it is the tree is singing from inside. That is something that she says there, and there's a very strong power that it gives to her, and a deep feeling of grounding and really connecting to this tree and the roots of the family, like all of us, filled out and grounded and connected by this strong and spiritual voice, a feeling of power. So what we've done after we were looking into these particular parts and tried to map what is an equalia side, and then how that relates to this asymmetry measurements happening at the same time, and how they're plotted against the events. We were then interested, well, one of the questions was spontaneous imagery, how it is emerging. So we did a bit of an explorational analysis where we looked again into this part where the grandma came up. You've seen that slide before, and you've heard that, and where this imagery came up. So what we've done then is a plotting of the time frequency, and we're looking into that, and this is what you now would really surely not hear. That's really quiet. So, but actually, well, that is something that we're working on, and that is offered from this brain vision, that you can record and see the events, and then later on really can go into a microanalysis, and that's what we've done then. So we were looking into the two traces, and what is standing out, and interestingly here, but we're looking at so these are the two traces from this is the therapist, and this is the guide, and this is the traveler, And what we see here is this burst in the frequencies here from the traveler. And then we were just looking into how that looks like when we try to have the short time frames in a loretta. And the interesting thing is, before this image of the grandma came up, there was this activation here on the 5 Hertz bin associated with the Rotman areas, and cognitive branching is one of the things. So you keep attention on one thing while you are also looking at, processing another thing. So that is what the therapist doing there, while then we see this 12 Hertz burst here, temporal gyrus, visual processing associated with that, and also phase perception. Now, I'm far from saying, well, this is where grandma now is flying in, but interestingly, it is that exact time frame that we're looking at, and on a millisecond range. And so then on the guide side, this processing in the cuneus. So we can trace what is happening. We can also see that how the imagery is emerging, and by using these tools, also with the Elan, to really then recontextualize that. So now I'm coming to the end. So the peaks in front of symmetry dynamics are representing emotional peaks of intensity in the selected moments, and the directionality of the symmetry peaks represent a shared emotional balance, so both increase left or right. What was interesting is that the traveler was much more in a positive emotional state during this travel, while the guide was predominantly more in a negative state. I'm not sure if you have recognized that when you were looking at the 2 plottings of the... And so we were then thinking, so is that because the traveler is in this altered state, in a very positive, relaxed mood, and is the guide caring and under the impression of the emotional impact of this traveler's problem? And so, of course, we were interested to know how much that is related in a resting state, and how much that would be different in the altered state. And you remember, this is what I mean. So you can see the traveler is much more on the left side, so more on the positive processing, while the guide more on the negative side. And so we were looking into that, but you can see more and more results on that on the poster, if you like to tomorrow. And so let me come here to the end. So next step is we're going to look more on more electrode arrays, maybe see how with the Loretta of the microstructures, what it gives us there. And we'll map the interpunction of the event structure and the brain-to-brain coupling indices of these MOIs, and do the correlations there. And I think it's quite encouraging, because actually you don't need to have a huge EEG tool. You just need to have 4 EEG traces to do that, and to see how that works in a therapy setting or during listening. And so I don't want to go into that. That was last time. I just want to say thanks to the collaborators, and that's it so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jörg, for this interesting presentation that brought therapy into the conversation. We have time for some questions. Mats?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jörg. Really fascinating. Fascinating findings. To what extent do you think the relationship between the traveler and the guides plays a role in finding these peaks when you do the dyadic frontal processing? I mean, would you expect similar findings if you just had two persons listening to music and you suggest some images? Would you also expect to find similar peaks in the frontal alpha asymmetry, or is it something special about the relationship between client and therapist?
Well, definitely they are sharing this emotional experience that is, of course, stronger because of that wish to get this therapy, this imagery journey. So definitely I think, I would say it's a different quality. How much we would see the same responses. I mean, the one that was standing out here, let me see if I can, yeah, where am I here? So, no, go, I don't want you. So that one here, when this image from the grandma appeared, it's flying towards the traveler, that was very important for the traveler because it has a strong personal meaning, because this person had an influence on her life. So not on ours, but on hers. And the therapist, of course, knew that this is of importance. So I'm not sure if when we listen to music together that we would have maybe these moments of sharing. We may have the same thought, oh, how is the drum now doing this and that? And we may have this, where we kind of know, well, we like it together, so this, and we don't need to say it because we see in the way how we look at each other, maybe that there is some appreciation on it. So there's all these non-verbal indices of how that intensity is related. But in this case particular, of course, I think that is different. So I hope this answers the question. So, but I think in general you could do that with, but how the intensity is. And that is what the interest in the therapy is, that you're looking really at notes of change somehow. And that's interesting how that is, happening over time in therapoia, in accompanying somebody. All right.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it works. Okay. Very interesting talk. Thank you very much. Do you have any ideas how this amplification between the guide and the traveler, is there any idea for a mechanism how that can take place? Do you consider mirror systems?
Well, it's one of the ideas, of course, that first of all, you're trained as a therapist to be very sensitive for the non-verbal signals that a person is giving. And you learn how to distinguish from your own ideas. So there's this idea of transference, countertransference, the old thing that Freud was talking about, that suddenly, as a therapist, you have a thought in your mind which is not yours, definitely. Suddenly you start thinking about whatever, mirrors or ceiling, something, although you never thought about it. So this is something which is coming from the other one. So that's a transference that is coming to you. So in the psychodynamic therapies, and then you start working with that because you're trained with that. How much that is related to mirroring action, and that is surely one of the tools that you use as a therapist, that you kind of inspect yourself and that you kind of go with the other one, and in deciphering what that may mean and how it is said and how it is performed, what the other one is doing, but then you should have the experience to go back and say, well, that's not me, that's coming from the other one. So you're using mirroring in a way to have an insight of the other one's internal state while you are observing it at the same time. So what she's doing here, the guide, is of course she's caring. So, and she's concerned definitely about the patient's state. But yeah, it's definitely one of the things that I think is in the background for a good therapeutic relationship work.
My question is more in the direction, do you think it's more verbal association between the report of the traveler that the guide hooks up on, or is it more an intrinsic, empathic kind of relation that develops?
I mean, you have
something common.
Yes. In this case, which is, let's say, music therapy, so where music is used in therapy, in a psychodynamic setting, or a psychotherapy setting, definitely the word is of importance, but the therapist definitely would hear and how things are said. Again, we would look at the prosody of how the wording is done. But of course, at the same time, there is the meaning coming up. The interesting thing with the grandma is that this image came up, and what we try to trace on the F8 electrode there a little bit is how is that recognized from the therapist beforehand. So first, if we use this as a potential working model, or kind of how it might happen, you have this, that you have the therapist, you keep track on what is going on, while at the same time you look at different parts of let's say, of what the person says in terms of cognitive branching, in terms of the meaning of the word, and then of how it is said. And then again, well, this image, she may have received that there is something happening. And so this is a process within a second where this is maybe recognized. And, well, it's just an indication how it might have happened. So yes, I think that this had an influence, while at the same time being aware of these non-verbal things is very important. I think the second part I have not answered, right? The second, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yes. Right, yes, definitely empathic skills are of importance when you become a therapist, to know exactly where something is happening from in the other. And yeah, there were two more.
And yeah.
Hi, yeah, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. And I, as a GM therapist, actually have a question that I've been wondering about for a while, and that's how important do you think is the client and the therapist knowing each other from before? So how many sessions, for example, did they have together? You said that the traveler was experienced.
Yes.
But was she experienced with the same therapist, or did she do GM with someone else?
Did GM with someone else, did GM by herself as well, offered that, so had level 3 training. And how often they both have done it together, I can't say in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, did they develop their relationship as the therapist and the client before, or was this the first time that they did it in that setting?
As far as I know, I can't 100% say, but that particular moment definitely was grandma's coming. Definitely the wish to be treated in a way. So, but surely it is so that it was that time. It was a question for the traveler had this problem, wanted to have it solved, and. Well, I can't say 100% yes, but they know each other definitely. How often they have had therapy before with each other, I can't say. And normally I can ask.
Yeah, because I just thought maybe if the therapist knew the client from before, they would be better in recognizing certain non-verbal cues, what's going on with the traveler. So that would enable them to be more in tune with each other if they knew each other from before.
I'm sure that there is this element of as well, but and that's what I would like very much here, that it is working suddenly, that there is, there's really this spontaneous imagery with a meaning coming up. That was definitely one thing that might have been due to that they know each other, but it's not uncommon that it happens in a therapy setting. I mean, that's why Freud, people laid them down on the couch just to have all these images coming up to see what they mean. So it doesn't mean that. So it will be more, hopefully, because when therapeutic relationships develops, of course, these moments might increase then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jörg. That was a really fascinating talk. This is just a clarification really for me. So you, again, and it's associated with the previous question. So the traveller is experienced, but did you say that the traveller was also herself a therapist?
Yes.
So
Yes.
would she have known the music in the nurturing program?
I guess, yes, she would, yes.
So
Well,
I'm-
that would be the same with the first, I mean, in order to research, you wanted to ask some more?
Yeah, I was just interested in the idea, when you've worked with a specific program like that, and specific music, and kind of rehearsed maybe ways of being in imagery, how that would have influenced the sort of dyadic relationship.
As I said, currently it is modeling. Well, the first one that I was spoken about, and you've heard that already, is really modeling a session where there was no therapeutic need. There was no need from the traveler to really go into a therapy situation. That is a real therapy situation. So it is not to be expected. But of course, the music as such and the programs are known to the person and how much she was expecting. So this notion of expectancy that we had already today is also influencing. I can't rule out. But the important thing here is that the spontaneous imagery, which is the important thing in the GIM, that really something pops out of the unconscious, or if you want, whatever Freudian or Jungian terms you want to use, that this is then really popping out with meaning, and symbolic interaction can then start on that. And so, but it is definitely, and that's something I want to go into more, is really having more sessions with, let's say, novices that never heard it before, and other therapy work. But yeah, so you have to start from somewhere, and that was quite encouraging. That yes, that we were able to capture nothing that she was voluntarily kind of producing, this grandma.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
This one.
One more question.
Thank you. Fascinating work. I have a question that goes a bit in the other direction, links to the previous talk actually. So when you, as a guide the traveler and you bring them into certain states, what happens, or how likely or how frequent is it that a distraction comes? And yeah, how would you, I'm just curious how often that might happen.
You mean a distraction
That
to
would,
the former talk?
that would bring you sort of out of the journey.
Got it, yeah. Well, the therapist would immediately, recognize that there is a distraction happening. I mean, being distracted with having these caps on already is a little bit of a distraction, and then having us in the background trying to record that and try not to be there at the same time. And so there's always a little bit of that. But let's say if suddenly the door opens, that of course might, that's quite interesting when you look into healing processes, that sometimes just these unexpected events are giving you a key to something, and the therapist could kind of help use this distraction in a nice way, or not in a nice way, but to use that as another input into the therapy. So you would try to incorporate that, but of course if suddenly the light goes out and outside is danger and you should all leave the building, well, that's it then. So you can't work. Does that?
Can I go a bit further and say, what if the distraction is of the nature of what I would imagine of, let me call it being self-conscious, so re-evaluating, thinking, so nothing from the outside. Well, it could actually be triggered by something from the outside, so that the person just becomes conscious and too aware of going somewhere where I'm really lacking words, I guess, but what I'm trying to say is, what if the person thinks, oh, what am I doing here? Is this really working? So does that happen, and would you see that in the EEG?
Well, the only way to, when you have, let's say, an accompanying recording of what is going on, you need to have a clear cut, and that's why we're using the Elan and the transcription and really going into the video analysis before we start analyzing what is going on in this part and have inter-rater, perspectives on the material, so that we can that we know, okay, this part is maybe really important. So, but in general, the therapist would definitely kind of respond to that there is maybe a resistance coming up, that the client has a resistance to work further with the therapist on that particular issue, and that immediately says, well, maybe this is of importance. So what to do now? Cognitive branching, going this way, going that way. What is now the right thing to do? And then you may have an input that tells you, okay, you should go down and open it up and ask more. So when she says, is there something that you would send to the baby? So there's input. And so that's what you would do then. But this is, you learn in the therapy education then to know what is resistance, what is transference, what are all these kind of tools that you have to use, and how is this related then to the flow of the music that you hear, to know the music definitely, and and the images that seem to come up with them.
Okay, I think that it's time to go for lunch. Let's thank Jörg one more time.
Thank you.